as Dean Warner suggested, this series has been called Where Credit is Due, African and African American Women's Scholarship. And it's been designed to highlight the kind of work that women have been doing in the field of African and African American studies. Very often that work is innovative and compelling, and we have an example of it this morning. As she suggested, we've had people from all over the country come and speak throughout this year since September, from the University, Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia, from Loyola here in the city, from the University of Massachusetts, from Ohio State University, from Michigan State University. And our last speaker next week will be from the State University of New York. This morning we have a graduate of Southern University at New Orleans who graduated magna cum laude in history. While she was here, she was on the honor roll. She was who's who among college students in America. She had the highest average in the history department. She was on the dean's list. And she authored a book, which she's going to share with you this morning. It's called Colored Creole, Color, Conflict, and Confusion in New Orleans, which deals with a very touchy subject, again, which other scholars haven't dealt with, which is color bias within the black community. As a result of her publication, she's appeared on the Tony Brown Show and a number of local television shows, and she's going to share this morning with us some of her discoveries. I understand she also has copies of the book available, which you might want to get a copy of afterwards, very inexpensively, only $2, student price. Aline St. Julien.
Good morning. I teach a speech class at Frye once a week, and we do facial exercises to get our words formed, to enunciate better. And we sound out the short vowels, A, E, I, O, U, I love you, wow, we, ooh, ow. And it's a warm-up. And now that I'm warmed up, let me begin. Colored Creoles, this is the little booklet. Colored Creoles is an autobiography which reveals things that were unspoken. It tells about color, conflict, confusion, about the identity crises, about prejudice among ourselves, and about the divide and conquer scheme that was played on us by the authorities that be, by the powers that be. I wrote this book in the early 70s. The word black was a derogatory term. And if you wanted to get anybody real angry, you call them black. My purpose in writing this was to provoke thought and discussion. And it has been discussed in a classroom setting and on in the media, like Dr. Frye said. And also the New York Times and the Washington Post has quoted this book. I hope in discussing this that we would have more understanding of each other, know what we're about, so that we could come closer together and be stronger in our struggle to be a people. If you can relate in any way to this book, I don't know if we're going to have time for a question and answer period, but if you can relate, I'm sharing with you first, so you're going to share with me afterwards, okay? Who am I? Who am I? Everyone must answer that question during his lifetime. Many times you do. And if you don't, people will identify you, will define you. My mother says I'm Creole. My teacher said I'm Negro. Europeans call me colored, and some call me nigger. Who am I? Am I white or black? If I'm Creole, I'm both. But Mr. Webster says, a Creole is a person descended from the original French settlers in Louisiana, especially of the New Orleans area. A person descended from the original Spanish settlers in the Gulf states, especially Texas. A person of mixed Creole and Negro descent, French as spoken by Creoles, especially in the New Orleans area. Loosely, anyone from Louisiana. This is a very broad definition, which makes it hard to distinguish one Louisianian from another. In the Old South, one drop of Negro blood made you Negro. Nevertheless, there is a distinct class of Creoles in the New Orleans area with a unique culture who have experienced this identity crisis during their lifetime. When I was a child, my parents, like their parents, never told us that we were Negroes. But it didn't take us very long to discern the differences between the white and black worlds. My brothers and sisters were not as persistent as I in trying to know of our identity. I have been struggling toward this end ever since elementary school. When I finally got my mother to answer that inevitable question, which most parents of our class dreaded and evaded for as long as possible, I was told that I was a Creole. My mother really believes that we are not Negroes. I can still remember how angry Mama was the day I came home from school with a questionnaire asking my parents when was the first time, excuse me, when was the first time you told your child she was a Negro? I can still remember how angry Mama was the day I came home from school with this questionnaire. Negroes were perceived to be the lowest people and were degraded daily. So this was an insult to my parents. Many of us wanted to be white. But since Negroes had the worst time of it, we felt lucky to be Creole. I was blissfully happy until a history teacher explained to us that Creoles were people of mixed French and Spanish descent. When I proudly stated to the whole class that I'm a Creole, my teacher said what my mother would never say. You are a Negro. I was crushed. I guess Mama wanted to shield me from hurt. I began to rationalize that if I'm Creole, I'm still mixed with French and Spanish, so that should make me a Creole Negro, right? White folks would use the words nice colored people when referring to us light-skinned Negroes. This, of course, was part of the game to make us feel superior to our darker brothers and sisters. I suppose this made me a colored Creole Negro, huh? Creole ranged in color from white to dark brown with a lot of yellow and tees and tans in between. Hair texture, if straight, is described as good hair, and kinky hair is considered bad hair. A dark child in a Creole family is better off with straight hair, which means he is more acceptable. If he has kinky hair and dark skin, he is usually the butt of family jokes. Like, where did you get that one from? Or someone must have slept in a woodshed with a nigger. Sometimes the older people would talk in French so that we children couldn't understand, but we knew they were talking about the oddballs. Most of these children grew up with much more self-hate than their lighter sisters and brothers. They usually chose the lightest friends and quite frequently married that type also. Fair skin and kinky hair was the less of the two evils, because then one could pass for white with a hat on the head. Many boasted about it, especially when they were called briquet, which was commonly used for those of us with reddish blonde, kinky hair. Many in my family were apt to be called briquet-type people, but the worst thing a person could call me was nappy head. But that really hit my weak spot. We were so ashamed of our kinky hair that we would use a hot comb secretly and would never admit straightening our hair. The children with good hair would tell us that they were glad they didn't have to fry their hair. Of course, we would deny it anyway. We only pressed our hair on special occasions in the privacy of our own home. We would take more ribbon when we had to run out of the rain or cover our heads so it don't go back. These were terrible changes for young people to go through. I often think of the northern Negroes who never had these customs, even though many looked like Creoles. Locale has spared them such hang-ups. But then there are some uptown Negroes here with the same physical appearances as us. I wonder if their self-hatred was as great as ours. Was there a boom in business in bleach cream and powder in the North, like here in New Orleans? Some old people would look like white roaches with their faces covered with powder, long-sleeve gloves covering their not-so-white hands, stockings on the legs, and a high-neck black dress. They would usually sit right in the back of the driver on our segregated buses. You may not remember, but we had screens. Colored had to sit in the back. But these poor people telling on themselves. I attended Xavier Preparatory School, manned by the Blessed Sacrament Sisters. I was the only one of 5 children who attended a Catholic school because we were poor as beeswax. My brothers and sisters, at least my brothers, who were in the armed services, paid my tuition. The only other Catholic school for blacks at the time was St. Mary's Academy, an all-girls school administered by the Sisters of the Holy Family, who were mostly Creoles. The student bodies of both schools were predominantly Creole, also, which made the primary consideration of most parents who enroll their children. The rationale being, we would be with our own kind. Quotes such as, birds of a feather flock together, or you tell me who you go with and I'll tell you who you are. These quotes were repeated to us by our elders many times to keep us in our class. The schools reinforced the narrow Catholic teachings we already had by making us feel special and grateful that the nuns were sacrificing their lives to save us. Favoritism was shown to light-skinned students, especially those with long, straight hair. Most of us knew better than to bring a dark friend home from school. We were told to be nice to them, but always choose friends you bring home, which meant other Creoles. We got in trouble with our parents more in public school because we had more dark children to befriend, but the situation was different in Catholic schools. One of the few dark girls at Xavier became my friend, and I was instrumental in converting her to Catholicism. Mama was upset when I brought her home, even though she was a nice person with high ideals who was about to become a Catholic. She had been boarding with a Catholic family who wanted her to become a Catholic of her own free will, without them pushing in any way. They must have made a wonderful impression on her, because all she needed from me was an invitation to join our church. I was thrilled when she asked me to be her godmother. This was my first conversion after an unsuccessful attempt in conversions. Mama was Catholic enough to let me be godmother, but not Christian enough to let her come into our home. She was too dark. This concept of beauty was instilled in us when we received that first little blonde, blue-eyed doll, reinforced by the church with the white Christ who resembled our doll grown up. and imprinted in our minds when we attended school and saw white images not only in books, but in the appearances of our own Negro teachers in Catholic school and public schools. By the time we reached the social age, with such continual indoctrination, we were ready to choose a spouse who met all the requirements of the typical Creole family. Usually, parents would have to know the family pedigree, so to speak, of your intended. His Spanish or French name would bring the first signs of approval. Most parents felt that the best place to meet the ideal partner was in church or at church functions, especially at Corpus Christi's church, where the most beautiful Creoles worshiped. One of my brothers looked forward to Sunday Mass at Corpus Christi. It is located in the 7th Ward, Creole land, about 3 blocks from one of the most exclusive Creole social clubs, the Autocrats Social and Pleasure Club. For most Creoles in that area, social life between Corpus Christi and the Autocrats, at least that was their social life, between those two. Corpus attracted many of us at their popular festivals. It was the ultimate in prestige, and other parishes rivaled her. But St. Peter Claver's, which was my original parish, was noted for its musical concerts, old folks concerts and plays. We had many talented people, especially in dramatics and singing. It was wonderful to see your fellow parishioners as actors and actresses in a live play on stage. For those Creoles who preferred dancing at the exclusive clubs, there was a choice of the Jeunes Amis, meaning young friends, or the roof garden. Like the Autocrat Social and Pleasure Club, they too did not allow dark people. One had to be light enough to pass the brown paper bag test. Their membership was made up mostly of relatives and close friends, many of whom were passant blancs, as people that passed for white. There was also a parading club called the Creole Fiesta Club, which marched annually. Most of the above-mentioned people belong. This club still exists today, but the participants in membership, like the Autocrats, have changed. They have darker colors now. We were too sheltered to go to many places other than church activities. My uncle used to give Saturday night suppers for the area people. We danced by the jukebox music of the big bands. The neighborhood fish fry was popular. My older sister went to house parties, but I, being the youngest, looked forward to the annual summer picnics at Bay St. Louis, Pass Christian, or Waveland. Many Creole families would gather at these private events. Cupid struck his bow and arrow during many of the picnics, it seemed, because that was an ideal place for matchmaking. The older people were not afraid to tell us when choosing a spouse to think of our children. This affected me, because I certainly didn't want my little monkeys to have kinky hair like me. Therefore, my husband just had to have straight hair. Who ever heard of choosing a partner for the rest of your life on that basis? But because of my ignorance, I did. Of course, economics and good character were considered, but appearance took priority for most of us. I did disregard the old folks' suggestion to put a little cream in your coffee, because my husband is darker than a brown paper bag. I was warned by one of my relatives that I could have a child as dark as the darkest member of his family and with my bad hair. But the only thing I couldn't understand was why would this handsome man want to marry a kinky-haired woman like me? I even asked my mother why I was so ugly, with brown skin and kinky hair. She consoled me by telling me that I had sharp features. So you see the havoc this kind of living can play on a person? Were my features the only asset in attracting a husband? If by chance a Creole really married someone out of his or her class, reaction could vary. You might be ostracized because you would surely have little nigger babies. You could be alienated from family socials and special events that occurred. I don't know of anyone being banished completely, except in the case of a pregnancy. They put you out, boy. If you were pregnant out of wedlock, you got out. Because that was the most unpardonable sin against your parents. This not only broke their hearts, but shattered their most prominent dream of a virgin walking up the aisle in white, inside and out, with Prince Charming. This was the pinnacle of success. Many parents spent money they never had for the wedding day, paying for it years afterwards. Many girls went to the altar in family way, pregnant, miserable, frightened, and sometimes sick, but knowing that this show must go on. Some parents fulfilled their ultimate goal of presenting their own little Virgin Mary, knowing that their daughter was already a blessed mother. One's greatest aim was to please one's parents by making it to the altar, and when one did, it was with a sigh of relief. Most of us made it through fear of family alienation, loss of reputation, shame of oneself or parents, and fear of never being worthy of a good man. I wish we had been taught the right reasons for being pure, which is first love of self, then parents, and of course God. The sins of impurity were impressed upon us at an early age. So in my child's mind, theft, lying, and even murder seemed secondary. We stayed children for so long. Dark persons who broke our class structure might be accepted if he or she had straight hair and sharp features and/or education, the latter of which we had little of because we were so absorbed in the hair color bit, putting value on the wrong things. Education is the one thing we really needed. I have observed the parents of a few dark families training or indoctrinating their children like we were into marrying Creoles. Most of their friends are light-skinned bourgeoisie Negroes or Creoles. Since integration, they have included whites, but they too have excluded dark members of our race in their close circle of friends. Makes no difference what color you are when the disease of prejudice hits you. What a contagious thing prejudice is. The pity of it is that when the man gave us the white fever, it was part of the game to divide and weaken us. Some of our passant blancs, our people that pass for white, married into the white race, sometimes crossing the color line completely. This divided brothers and sisters who sometimes remained separated for as long as they lived. They married in white churches, sent their children to white schools, and worked as white, sometimes never letting out the secret of their true identity to spouse or children. There were two supposedly white prize fighters who were making a name for themselves, but the secret got out that they were colored or had black ancestry. It ruined their careers. A court case was pending to determine their identity, but I don't remember if they ever settled it. Some inheritance settlement cases developed also, and many so-called whites were found out to be black, and they lost out. But one Creole woman whose very successful father had been living as white in another state sued for a share of his will after his death, and won a sizable amount. Many of these renegades died in secrecy. Their very private funerals were the saddest. Many other Creoles went to Los Angeles to escape discrimination, they said, but ended up passing over there too. They tried to keep the old custom by living in the same area and attending the same Catholic church. New Orleans visitors would come back home saying that there is another Corpus Christi church in Los Angeles, California. No matter how far Creoles go, they stay clannish. Some Creoles are still passing in California to this day. I know that now that most Creoles are Catholic because way back when when our ancestors were ashamed of belonging to the black race, and being confused free men of color, without a race, like half-breeds, returned to the white church. The elaborate church weddings with the brides looking like Snow White or Cinderella at the ball is the greatest imitation of white life. I have seen only 2 African-American church weddings thus far, and one happened to be in our immediate family. I saw a very large double wedding with 2 sisters of one family marrying 2 brothers of another family. They were twins marrying other twins. Cousins not related married each other also. My husband and I have the same cousins, same first cousins, and yet we are not related. His uncle by blood is my uncle by law, and my aunt by blood is his aunt by law. So the children from their marriage are related to both of us. Even though there are remarkable changes in our custom today, intermarriage of Creole families kept this unique culture going for a long time. On the other hand, Creoles who intermarried with whites took on the white image even to the extent of becoming avowed segregationists themselves. But their greatest fear was that one of their offsprings would be dark. You can imagine the embarrassing situations this created. Come to think of it, we played the same game as the segregationists. Only we had to stay in our own ballpark, don't you see? Some of our women just went and lived with white men, degrading themselves and verifying a fact of self-hate. Even today, you see signs of self-hate among black people who wear blonde wigs, the darkest ones being the most conspicuous. Well, I came to a point in my life where I was not proud to be Creole. I wanted so much to belong to a race instead of a class. I found myself constantly thinking about my identity. I thought about those old shameful tales of why some of us look different, such as the raping of slave women by the master. I suppose from such unions the mulatto woman originated. She in time, for survival reasons, pruned and prepared her daughter to become the mistress of the French or Spanish settler, therefore negotiating with him for food, shelter, and a better way of life as their housekeeper. The main priority of the product in this transaction was virginity. I heard about the quadroon balls where the interested parties would meet. I think some of us colored Creoles were born out of that arrangement. The male products of a guilt-ridden slave master sometimes would be freed and even sent off to Europe to be educated. Black and white blood was mixing to the white man's self-satisfaction. Consequently, as the story goes, a prominent white man who knew that he had black blood burned down the courthouse to destroy the records. Color was an important thing in those days, wouldn't you say? I'm so glad I'm not white now. But when I decided to step out of that Creole bag, I became a Negro. No more writing colored next to color on applications. I even realized that my kinky hair was good hair and that only sick hair is bad hair. When I took the permanent out, it was like taking off a mask. I sensed freedom for the first time. I gave myself freedom. It was like saying to everyone, this is the real me. Now when someone compliments me on how pretty my hair looks, I know they mean my real hair. One of my aunts could never understand because I let my hair go natural even before it was stylish. I did it because we were going on a weekend trip to the Astrodome with the CYO, the Christian Youth Organization. Since we were going to use the swimming facilities at the motel, I felt it would be easier to deal with hair cut short and natural. I never did like setting hair because bobby pins were painful to me. It was more convenient to leave the rollers home, and I was lazy about pampering my hair. I wore a bush after the trip. I guess I was before my times because negative responses coming from relatives and friends were surprising and appalling. My aunt tried to make me feel ashamed by calling me African, but to no avail. As I danced around like a Hollywood African, making all kinds of gyrations, she got angry, and she called me a MF. The impact of her anger frightened me. I realized how deep-seated self-hate was, and that many of us will never overcome it. Hair is still the topic of discussion to this day. I've been accused of influencing others in the family to let their hair go. African culture was far removed from our lives. We were turned off by spirituals, and even though some of our Creoles were jazz greats, we were trying to develop a taste for Bach and Beethoven. The latter, we later learned, happened to have black blood. So much is hidden in closets. We were deep into emulating the movie stars, but we were devout Catholics, and our models were the white priests and nuns. Every black Catholic church is a mission church here in New Orleans, and they were steadily raking us in. Those of us who were born into Catholicism became more white than black. We missed most of the black experience. We were not very Christian either, because we looked upon black people as loudmouths who shouted during worship because they lost control of their senses. Of course, our religion was the most controlled of all, but I didn't realize then that we were becoming as sterile as the white man who considers emotions a sign of weakness. Because the European frowns on emotions, we suppressed our natural inclinations and instead imitated him. We had the audacity to be ashamed of our darker brothers and sisters for being real. What a confusing existence. How in the world can one know his identity when one comes from a Creole background, is recognized as colored, indoctrinated in the white Catholic Church, taught in Negro schools the cultures of every race but one's own, and performs in schools the cultures of every race but one's own? Dutchmen, Spaniards, Russians. I was never an African queen. After marriage, as the children came along, I decided it would be different for them. They would not be as ignorant and biased as I was. They would know that they are descendants of black people as well as their Creole background. As I look back, I was not proud to speak of my African heritage because I only knew what the white history books said about Africa. I tried to set an example by not describing our people's physical characteristics or saying the American types, the Joneses and the Browns, or looking at their dark features, calling them briquet like we were, or he is just like white, which was, of course, a definite compliment to most Creoles. The change came gradually, but it most certainly did come. The slogan, Black Power, was shouted by Stokely Carmichael when the children were small. It was easy for me to explain the new pride and dignity those words brought to our people as they grew older. Creoles were just as confused and fearful as the European. Black power seemingly was a threat to the white man's way of life, and I guess the Creole way of life also. The civil rights demonstrators were just a bunch of troublemakers. We were not participants in the marches because we were always taught to be nice, which meant don't upset Mr. Charlie. But many benefits derived by the struggles of our darker people were enjoyed first by Creoles who stood on the sidelines calling them black niggers. The man took his good time employing our most visible people. The word black still divides us. Many Creoles cannot even to this day recognize the fact that when it is used to acknowledge race, it connotes dignity and self-pride in one's characteristics, which comes from his African heritage and has nothing to do with color as in the old day. Some people are still awkward in using black instead of colored or Negro in conversation. I believe that is why the National Office of Black Catholics was not generally accepted by the New Orleans Creole Catholics. This organization was formed by the black clergy, nuns, and laymen whose main purpose is self-determination in policies relating to the black membership of the Catholic Church. The National Office of Colored Catholics might have made it. Colored Catholics just don't join organizations with a militant sound of black in its name. The NOBC could be strengthened with an influx of young people, but so many have left the institutional church. They couldn't care less about the hypocritical church or the customs and traditions of the Creole culture. They are marrying darker people because they love them. They are trying to shed the white image by wearing their bushes and creating their own lifestyles. Granted, some do wear the bush purely for style, and some are still living in the past with their parents, holding on to tradition like the die-hard segregationists, but their numbers are decreasing. Creoles must realize that as far as Europeans are concerned, we are all Negroes, because that is what they made us. A few years back, a Creole professor at a well-known Catholic university was roughed up by a young rookie cop who overreacted before he got the facts of the matter straight. A case was brought against the policeman, and later it was dropped. Now, a man of this caliber was publicly abused, even though he was a member of the mayor's Human Relations Committee, the bishop's Human Relations Commission, and only God knows what other integrated organization he belonged to. Maybe he settled out of court, but he could have gotten a public apology from the mayor at least. A couple of our political officials were harassed by the police also. So you see, black people are all in the same boat. We have to integrate, but with each other, among ourselves. Let us take the lessons our children are given by accepting a person as is and negating the bias taught by elders. I taught my children to look within a person because beauty is skin deep, and they believe that. I was Mr. Segregationist's guinea pig, so I know that integration with whites will not solve our problem, only theirs. They have used it like everything else to their own advantage. The so-called liberals I have met in biracial organizations, with few exceptions, are opportunists, status seekers, limelight lovers, guilt sufferers, hobby hunters, and business or political people who find it expedient to belong. I believe it is necessary to separate ourselves from these mixed, self-appointed do-gooders and strengthen ourselves out. God knows we have tried integration. Now it is time to close the gap educationally, economically, and racially among ourselves, whether we be Creoles, colored, Negro, or black. We must be one if we are to progress as a whole. Individual accomplishments will make us a first nigger, but will not strengthen us as a race. Bourgeoisie Negroes run into the suburbs to forget the past or fooling no one but themselves. Black talent should be where it is needed the most, in our own urban communities. The real shame is a good black teacher in a predominantly white school, or the black doctor getting rich on poor people, or the black lawyer who is too busy to give free counseling to those who can't afford it. Acquiring status symbols is a waste of time and money, but pooling our resources, starting co-ops is a whole new cooperative way of living, caring, and loving each other, which will make us a strong people. I believe sincerely that sitting on biracial human relations committees have not changed this racist society very much. It is a waste of time talking to whites about conditions that are ancient history. We are only included when we are safe Negroes. I was a safe Negro and an ignorant Creole, not knowing who I was. But being a colored, Creole, Catholic, Negro, African American has brought me through the struggle of finding my true identity. All of these, race, class, religion has made me black. Who am I? I am a proud, very proud black African woman. And I like to use the term, as Jesse Jackson says, African American. Thank you.